And now I have the immense pleasure to introduce to you a man that's really a man, I would say. I mean, if you have Harrison Ford state that, damn, he's got my job. This was from Morning Glory, one of these Hollywood movies. And I thought, looking at the movie, of course he got your job. He's the much better reporter than anyone else, so why not? Anyway, Miles O'Brien is a very special reporter, and he's very dear to us because he's been a very staunch supporter of humans to Mars, of space in general, and he's coming from a place that, you know, of knowledge of these things. He's not a reporter of the quick facts. He simply knows his stuff, which is great for any reporter, and Miles is one of the top in that. Now, next to that, Miles is going to do the moderation, and I hope he's going to be gentle with William Gerstenmaier, because I know that sometimes Miles can be, you know, prickly, you know, really getting them there, and it might be really interesting for us, of course. And William Gerstenmaier, as you all know, he is in charge of human exploration and operations for the mission directorate at NASA. So he's not just anybody, he's someone we need to look up to, and we need to look for answers to getting us to Mars on that path that Charles Bolden was showing us. Then his co-speaker is Michael Gazarik. He is the administrator for space technology, and as Charles pointed out, we need to straighten our technologies, so no SLS to Mars. And I'm pretty sure that Michael can tell us how far we are with any of these things, and I'm sure Miles is going to introduce them even more than I did. Miles.
Thank you, Artemis. I appreciate that. Good to see you. So, is this on? Can you hear me? Hey guys, sit down. Oh, can you hear me? So Artemis, are you mad that I cut you off last night? Is that why you're calling me prickly?
No, not
okay.
at all.
I'm just kidding.
But you're the guy that will let them speak their minds, even if they don't want to.
Excellent.
That's what I like about it.
Well, good. It's good to have Mr. Gerstenmaier and Dr. Gazarik, right? Mr. and Dr.? You didn't finish your thesis, right? So
no, that's correct.
I'll give you an honorary doctorate. You know.
He does real work.
I hate to bring these things up, but in the interest of being prickly, anyway, it's good to have you both here. I guess this is the G spot for Mars, right? The killer Gs, whatever you like. So let's talk about Mars and what NASA. Hey, you know, it wasn't that long ago. I remember going to NASA. This is a true story, and it was before one of the shuttle flights, and all the astronauts at that time were wearing these Mars or bust buttons. Do you remember that era? That was, what, late 90s, I guess. And we're about to roll the interview with an unnamed astronaut who I shall not name, I should say. And the public affairs officer whispers into his ear, and the pin disappeared. And any mention of the M word was banned at that time. It was really a strange era. There was no way that they would ever even go there. So the fact that we have NASA openly talking about Mars, even if there may not be enough money to get there, is a good sign. So that's good. Would you agree with that, gentlemen?
Yes. We'd agree.
All right, excellent. The other thing that's absolutely historically unprecedented, as far as I know, is that we have 2 NASA associate administrators, and they have a total of 4 PowerPoint slides. That's really good. And so we're going to get, that will mean we'll have an opportunity for discussion. Yes, so round of applause for that, and let's mark that moment. They're kind of going without a net here, and we appreciate it, or as Gers said, a cappella. So let's, what I'm going to do is we'll do the opening presentations, and then we'll have a little discussion, and then are there microphones? Where are they? So if you have, I'd like to integrate the questions as we go. So if you have questions, just come up and I'll recognize you as we're talking. Okay? Okay. Go ahead, Bill.
All right. I think I'll go over to the podium here and I'll start. And if I could have my first slide, please. All right, next slide. What I wanted to do with this slide is just show you that things are a little bit different within the agency. And what we're trying to do here is we're really working across the directorate. So before we looked at things very much stovepipe, where The Space Technology Mission Director did one thing, Human Exploration did another, Science Mission Directorate did a third thing. And what we're really doing within the agency is we're trying to combine all those activities together. So we're very actively involved with the Science Mission Directorate as they're doing robotic missions to Mars on Curiosity rover. We have a radiation monitor that sits on the rover today. They also, on their RTG, they're flying some paint that was actually tested on the space station. So we are really working together. This slide came from the Mars Planning Group for the Mars 2020 rover. We're working with the Science Mission Directorate and the Space Technology Mission Directorate to figure out what we want to put on that mission, and they're in the process of doing instrumentation selection. Can I have the next chart? This is also to show that really Mars is really the focus not only of NASA, but it's also the global exploration roadmap. It is clearly the destination that I think all our international partners are kind of pushing towards. This was built by the ISEG group. It's 12 countries got together. They've laid this out, and this is the general roadmap that they've laid out. It's a framework. It still needs a lot of work to get laid in, but you can see the first piece is the International Space Station. We think that is critical, and that is a first step to Mars. It lets you understand how the human body is going to perform for long duration microgravity exposure, up to 300, 400, 500 days. It also lets us test systems and hardware that are going to be needed for the Mars-class mission. So the station is really, really important. There's a couple of very interesting AAS meetings coming up on the space station, one on May 1st here in Washington, and then there's another one coming up in June in Chicago. So again, you ought to watch what the space station is doing and look how we can use the space station to help us get to Mars. The next piece are the robotic missions I talked a little bit about. We're trying to show all the global missions that are going to Mars and in Mars vicinity. Also some asteroid missions that are there that can help us build, again, techniques and processes that help us eventually get to Mars. And then again, all this kind of links together with Mars as the ultimate destination. And then the final chart, this is the chart. If I can have the next chart. This is the chart that Charlie showed you earlier. Basically, we see this as really three regions. We're in the Earth-reliant region now with space station learning tools and techniques in low Earth orbit with the space station. We then think we need to go to this proving ground region that's around the moon. We don't necessarily have to land on the surface of the moon. There's some advantages of that, some disadvantages. But being in the vicinity of the moon is far enough away that we can look at risk mitigation techniques. We get exposed to the higher radiation environment of deep space to understand how to deal with that. Look at innovative rendezvous proximity operation techniques that we can use for docking two spacecraft remotely. And again, you're far enough away from the Earth that you're really pushing systems to do a different way than we've done in low Earth orbit, but you're not so far away that you really have to take that big step in risk. So we call this the proving ground region. It's much like Mercury and Gemini did for Apollo. They let us build skills, techniques, operational capabilities in this proving ground region, and then we're essentially get to the Mars ready piece where we're really ready to go to Mars and we've got those techniques in place. And so this is our basic plan we've laid out. Clearly, budget is going to limit how fast we go through this piece, but I think we're making real progress today. You can see the work we're doing on station. We actually judge experiments on how their benefits are to Mars. SLS and Orion are clearly focused that way. The asteroid redirect mission, the bus that's used for that mission is actually a Mars cargo vehicle that we'll use to transport cargo to Mars. So we're looking at how we can take the pieces we're doing today to really get us ready to go to Mars. So with that, I look forward to your questions, and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Excellent. All right. Michael?
Thank you. Well, great to be here this morning. Just a few remarks until we get to questions, and let's talk a little bit about technology. If you read a recent op-ed piece by Dr. William Ballhaus and General Lester Lyles, let me just read you this quote from that op-ed piece. It says, "If we are truly committed to exploring an asteroid or returning to the moon, or someday landing humans on the surface of Mars, we need sustained and substantial investments in advanced space technology and capabilities." I don't think that's anything new to this audience. We know this. Just like last week also, General Bolden and Dr. John Holdren had a similar discussion at the NAC about the need for technology to explore deep space. Deep space exploration is imminent, with Orion coming online later this year with its first test flight, SLS and Orion right behind it. Our ability to live and thrive in deep space is upon us. And so investments in technology are key. That's what I want to talk to you a little bit about this morning. The Space Technology Mission Directorate has been up and running for a little over 3.5 years. We have a number of investments. You'll see us make a number of investments over the next 18 months in a variety of what we call 8 thrust areas. And they are the areas that you well know. When you look at going to deep space, when you look at going to Mars, right, it's about getting there, it's about landing there, it's about living there, and then return. And if you break that down into the technologies we need in propulsion, in life support, radiation protection, entry, descent, and landing, I think Charlie mentioned, you know, we're working on some of those advanced entry, descent, and technologies. Today we'll have an incredible flight in June off the coast of Hawaii as we look at inflatable structures for descent and landing, led by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, really taking that next step above and beyond the metric ton of the Mars Curiosity rover that landed a little over a year ago, August. We know we need more than a metric ton to explore Mars, and so how do we slow down? And we're working on that area today, as well as other areas that I'll mention. To do that, I think instead of some PowerPoints, we actually have a short movie. So with that, Wade, if I could have a 2-minute movie, let me take you through this, and I'll warn you, it comes at you really quick. My kids loved it, and my wife thought it was way too fast.
By the mid-2030s, I believe we can send humans to orbit, Mars, and return
April
them safely
2010,
to Earth.
President Obama
And a landing on Mars will
set the
follow.
vision for where and the ultimate destination of where we're headed. So just a brief walk in history. We won't spend too much time with this. You well know it, but starting back with Mariner 4, a whole series of missions. The Viking set of landers was incredible back in the 70s. And then, of course, you know, skipping forward to Curiosity and the incredible work that Curiosity is doing right now on Mars. And so just a couple of the key questions, again, that this audience knows. You know the challenges we have. You know that it's hard. And so these are some of the things, as you know, that we have to build, the capabilities, the technologies that we need to develop over these next couple decades to get ready. And so no surprise, we think we're ready for that challenge. And let me take you through 8 of the areas that we have investments on today that really enable us to explore deep space. And so we're going to quickly walk through each of these areas, and I'll say just a few words about them. Communications and navigation is certainly one of the areas that we have to improve on. We're working today on optical communications, high definition bandwidth to explore the universe, both around orbit as well as deep space optical communications. Getting there, how do we get there? Whether it be chemical propulsion, nuclear thermal propulsion, and certainly solar electric. And we have strong investments in solar electric, not only to move an asteroid, but to provide that cargo tug that we need to explore Mars. Entry, descent, and landing, one of the key challenges is how do we land? 7 minutes of tear. How do we get that kind of mass to the surface of Mars? As I say, we're working on this today. Wait till you see the test in June. We think robotics will go along with us. Spirit and Opportunity covered 10 kilometers in 10 years. We need to maybe cover 10 kilometers in a week. How do we do that? Radiation protection, of course, is a challenge both on the transit as well as on Mars. We're making those measurements, learning about the environment today. Once we get there, on life support, can we close the loop? Today, around 40% or so of oxygen recovery on station. Can we get that to 90%? We have investments now to work on that, as well as recycling of water. Power remains a challenge, of course. We're working on some nuclear surface power now to begin the power generation that we're going to need as we operate on the surface. Can we convert carbon dioxide to oxygen? We have a payload on Mars 2020 in combination with Science and Human Exploration Mission Directorate to begin to prove out that capability. So those investments are underway today. And the kind of the really neat benefit of this, right, is that not only those technologies enable us to go to Mars, but many of these have implications for life here on Earth. Many of these have implications beyond going to Mars. Solar electric propulsion, for example, has multiple applications in our commercial industry. Optical comm has incredible benefits for other government agencies as well as industry here on Earth. So the technologies and the capabilities that we need to go to Mars not only benefit getting there, but also where we are today for the Americans' aerospace community, as well as the other missions we have in NASA. So it may be a little early for a mission patch to go to Mars, but certainly we can work on the capabilities and the technologies to get there. And that's what the Space Technology Mission Directorate is about. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Miles.
All right, thank you very much, Michael. So let's, gentlemen, let's get this straight, because what Michael lays out there is a lot of technological challenges. It requires about 6 to 8 eureka moments that, if you're keeping score. Can we go to Mars today? You know, in a perfect world, if we just had a blank check, could we just go today? Or is it impossible right now?
I don't think it's impossible, but we clearly need to work on many of these things that we talked about. And by going to Mars, it's not just going to the vicinity of Mars, but actually landing on the surface.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
I think entry, descent, and landing will be a challenge, and Mike can talk maybe a little bit more about that.
I think it's a great question. I think one way to look at it, right, Apollo 13, with the event that it had, I believe that event in duration was around 84 hours. We had to keep the crew alive for 84 hours. So we have life support systems that if you're going to go to Mars, they got to work for months. Possibly even over a year, depending on how you get there and how long you stay. We got to take the steps to be able to get that in place, and that's going to take some time to get a reliable system in place. Entry, descent, and landing, as we mentioned, we can land a metric ton on the surface of Mars. That's the most we know how to do. We know we're going to. That's about the size of a Mini Cooper car. I think we all know if we're going to explore Mars, it needs to be something bigger than that. So there are challenges we have. I think we know what the challenges are, but it will take some time to get those technologies and capabilities ready.
So have you counted up how many breakthroughs you feel like you need to get there?
You know, again, we ought to talk about it a little bit. I'm not sure they're breakthroughs in this sense.
Is it iterative?
I think we can build on what we know now today and just expand it. So, for example, life support. We have life support on station. It works pretty well. It's 85% closed loop. But we need to push it to where it's more reliable, doesn't require so much maintenance, et cetera. We need to look at the ability to 3D print parts to do repair. We're doing that on board Space Station. Right. So I don't consider those necessarily big breakthroughs, but we've got to kind of get comfortable that this technology is really the maturity level, that you're ready to go use it for this mission where it absolutely positively has to work. So those are, that's the way I look at the challenges that's in front of us.
I totally agree, and I think the station allows us to do that. The operation, the proving ground that Charlie and Bill had mentioned, that's the key, right? We got to take systems from days or months or weeks and turn that into longer durations. And we need the time and capability to go do that.
Well, let's talk about this. Do you have something you want to add there? Or?
I was just going to add that I think we've got to also make sure that every piece of technology we work on, it's extensible to Mars, and that's the judge of the technology that we're working on, right? Does it really extend to Mars, and can we use it in that vision? I don't want to do demonstrations just for demonstration's sake. I want to actually be putting systems together that we can actually use for Mars. So the example is the asteroid redirect mission, the robotic spacecraft. I've given that to the team as a design condition. That is the bus basic architecture you will use to transport cargo to the vicinity of Mars. So now we're looking at missions built on using that as a key piece. So Orion and SLS, we know where they're going and what capabilities they can do. We take those as a given. How do they fit into the Mars mission? So we look at everything we're doing. So when we do the next life support system on station, it won't be a life support system for station. It will be the life support system that we plan to put in the habitation module that goes to Mars. So we'll ring it out on station and we'll go. So it's not a demonstration, let's test this, see how it works. Nope, we're going to actually take those systems to space and see how they work.
What do you see as, as you work on problems, this can change, of course, but right now as you look at it, what's the hardest problem? Is it radiation exposure or something else?
Again, I think radiation exposure needs some understanding. There's not much we can do with the galactic cosmic background radiation unless we put some kind of magnetic shielding in there. We're approaching it several different ways. We went to the Institute of Medicine. We asked them to take a look at our current standards for radiation limits on astronauts, and we said, could we potentially push those limits a little bit? Is it ethically acceptable to maybe change those limits that we carry for mortality caused by space radiation to our crews? Could we change those and alter those? And they gave us some considerations to talk about that. So we're pushing not only the technology that helps protect the human, but also looking at the requirements we have, and are they really realistic requirements, or is today's medical environment allowed us to do some things differently?
So the restrictions themselves may not be, they might be too restrictive in other ways, and astronauts might sign up and accept that risk.
Yes, and we've got now basic guidelines from the Institute of Medicine of what considerations go into that discussion.
Well, that solves a lot of problems if you change the rules like that, doesn't it? Yeah.
We're not totally changing the rules, but we've got the framework. But again, the point is we're not looking at a single solution or a single breakthrough. The question is we're looking at all aspects of the problem to try to figure out a solution that gets us to what we want to go do.
So let's talk about ISS for a minute. ISS is a proving ground. on the one hand, that sounds good. A lot of people would say budgetarily, ISS as a drain on the budget is a problem. Does ISS give you more than it takes?
I believe it does. I mean, it forces you to make decisions right up front, like the life support system we're going to upgrade. If we make that the exploration life support system, I've got a test bed I could never test. I mean, we could test on the ground, and then what we learned with space station was we thought we had the greatest carbon dioxide removal system in the world, right? Well, we get it on orbit, and we find out all this dust actually moves out of the catalyst bed and goes into valves and clogs everything up. We also found out on our water system that the Tygon tubing is permeable to carbon dioxide, so carbon dioxide goes into the water system, actually creates a nutrient-rich environment for bacteria, and we actually have biofilm all over inside our cooling systems. We tested extensively on the ground, and we saw none of those problems. But by going to the microgravity environment of space and being in the closed-loop environment where the CO2 level is a little bit higher here on the Earth, that teased out and pushed those problems. So I think station can give you that chance to really dry run and test the equipment on orbit. But again, you don't use station as an ancillary or piece. You pick pieces that are absolutely necessary, and you use the unique advantage of station to do that. And some things are better tested on the ground. So you make a smart decision about which you want to go do the most cost-effective way to keep moving towards Mars.
So Michael, if you didn't have the station up there, would you be looking to make a station or some capability like that?
Yeah, I think you would be spending considerable resources to get a platform to operate in, get to the station. Also, don't forget the transportation angle as well. We have a means to get to space to demonstrate technologies. So the station provides a research platform that's already supplied, that already has crew, that already has comm, that already has propulsion. What we found in some of our space tech demonstrations is, to focus on the money on the technology and try to leverage what else is out there, as opposed to spending money time and time again on the same kind of basic needs for operation in deep space.
I think another piece on station is the one-year increment we're going to do with our crew members next year in 2015. We're very experienced looking out to 6 months. We don't see anything that looks problematic beyond 6 months, but even though it's only one data point, it still is one data point that says, hey, is there anything that really starts occurring beyond the 6-month period? We've looked at it before. The Russians have flown many years, have flown several year-long missions. But I think it's time we now look at it with the tools we've got today to see if there's anything in the human system that actually changes over that 6-month period, to see if there's something that is continuing to degrade that hasn't reached steady state in terms of human degradation and keeping the human alive.
So how important is it to simulate a Mars mission in low Earth orbit that way? And how close do you have to make it to a real Mars mission to be of value? Do you build in the communication delay? Do you block the windows so they don't get to look at Earth? How do you design something like that?
It's interesting. We've talked about that. We do some things now. We're doing a lot of procedures now on board station that are autonomous, where the crews actually do the operation without any ground involvement. That was geared specifically towards the Mars environment, where the time delay doesn't allow the ground team to interact with the crew. So we're doing those. We've talked about taking away the windows and taking away communication time. It's interesting.
I bet the astronauts love that.
And they don't like that. So what's interesting is they say to go to Mars, they're willing to put up with all these, stressors in their life, right? But just to do it for fun as a test mission, they're not so keen about that. So that's an interesting human dynamic already. It's almost, with the marathon yesterday, right? How many marathons do you have to run before you're really ready to go to a marathon, right? Or are you good enough maybe running 10 miles or 18 miles, and then you're ready to go do the marathon when it comes time to do the marathon. So I think the trick with Mars is to not do so much that you've reduced all the risk to zero. We will not reduce all the risk to zero, but to reduce the risk to a low enough level that, hey, we're ready to go give this a shot, and we've got a reasonable chance of pulling this off, but it will not be risk-free on that first mission.
Now, I don't know whose offices this would fall in, but among your challenges, I didn't see the psychological issues as one of the issues. That probably is more in your bailiwick. Yeah, the Mars 500 experience and what they've done, they've tried to, delve into this, but there's some big challenges there.
Yeah, I think that, we've got some good studies, again, on the behavioral aspect. Again, I think, the dimension is really different. If you look at our crews on station, they spend a lot of time looking at the home planet and taking pictures. There's a real tie between the human and where you are, but then when that planet, and we've got pictures from the rovers again looking back at the Earth, and this Earth is one star among many, You know, that's a different psychological push, but I think that's important too in the way we talk about this. You know, we're talking about moving humans into deep space. You know, I'm trying to change the discussion a little bit. We talk about it as exploration. When I think about exploration, I think about going, investigating, and then coming back. I think we need to start talking about it in terms of maybe pioneering, where we're actually going to potentially stay. And that really starts changing the dynamic. So the investment in Mars is so much. We don't want to do this as a one-time mission. We want to actually have the infrastructure there and think about this as actually moving human presence off the Earth into the solar system.
You want to add in that? Okay.
No, I think Bill said it very well, and I think that's the part about is building the capabilities that are extensible as we go to Mars.
Well, you know, I always think about history here, being a history major, and you think about the voyages of Magellan or Captain Cook or whatever. And frankly, somebody going to Mars is going to have more contact with Earth, or the home port, if you will, to use the analogy, than some of those voyages. Do you use those historical parallels as you inform your decisions about how to handle this?
I think, you know, again, historically we ought to discuss a little bit is the difference is when you do terrestrial big voyages, you still have oxygen to breathe, right? You still have water you can drink, right? You could bring some food with you, right? When you got to wherever you were going, you could actually grow plants. When we start becoming, you know, in the charts I say Mars ready or Earth independent, when we start breaking that tie back to the planet, that's a different dimension. I mean, you really have to carry with you, or you have to have enough assurance that you can use the carbon dioxide environment of Mars to generate oxygen. Can you get water out of the Martian environment? You're going to have to really prove that some of those things that are there. So again, I think terrestrial exploration was a little different because it wasn't quite the level of what we're doing here, where we're essentially putting a human in an environment that the human cannot live on its own, and we have to carry with it enough support capability to keep the human alive and functioning.
How much of that ability, and by the way, if you got questions, feel free to come to the microphones and we'll include your questions in this conversation. How much of the ability to, you know, live off the Martian land do we have to prove before we put people on the surface, you think, Mike?
Yeah, so there's been a number of studies on that, and that show that if you can do in situ resource utilization, that is, get your water, well, if you can get oxygen, you can get water, you can get fuel, you can get, you know, air to breathe. That show the amount of mass, it really becomes a mass problem. How much do you have to take with you, and how much can you rely on when you get there? I mean, I think one would argue that if we're going to rely on a system, you'd want it to be there ahead of time. You want it to be able to be reliable and be able to store the oxygen so you know it's there. I think that would be the most prudent step to go do. Now, we're not there yet, but we are taking the first step here in Mars 2020.
So that would be advanced missions, multiple landings, where these autonomous vehicles would literally at least prove it, if not create a store. I
mean, one advantage maybe we have compared to historically is we can send some scout missions ahead of time that, you know, the other early explorers didn't have that capability. But again, as Bill points out, the environment is so harsh and so extreme.
Yeah, but again, the idea is that when you put those scout vehicles there, they ought to be generating resources that you can use when the crew mission follows. Because again, I think in this constrained environment we've got to make sure everything we do is extensible to the next step, that we're not doing, let's just do a demonstration and build a little bit of oxygen right out of the Martian atmosphere. If we're going to build oxygen, I want to actually build enough that could be potentially used and play forward in another scenario.
As you paint that picture, and I think you've done a nice job kind of pulling together a lot of these disparate elements in a way that it provides a cohesive narrative, and I hope that plays well on Capitol Hill as you try to sell this program. But as and what's interesting about it, it's kind of like, we all think of success in space as Apollo. There was a deadline and a commitment. There was a Cold War, a martyred president, all these things lined up, and we perceive that the way to go to space. If you don't set a date and go and be there by then, that's a failure. This is a little more like, it seems to me, building the interstate system. There's a sense of let's build some infrastructure out there, and it doesn't, frankly, have the same headline capability, if you will, that the space race had. But what it offers is sustainability. And I guess that's a long way of me saying that this is a nuanced story. So how can we convey that story to people who are less dialed into what NASA is doing right now? Or is that my job?
That's your job.
Okay.
But I would say it's really, I tell you, it's all of our job, right?
Yeah,
we need to look at what we're doing today and then describe it in a way that really makes sense. You know, we just flew up on SpaceX. We flew this thing called Veggie, right, which is going to grow plants in space. Well, we've grown a bunch of plants before. This is the first time we're actually growing plants for the crew to eat. So this is not for a science experiment to see how the plant will grow in microgravity. This is actually food for the crew to augment their diet. So this is the beginning of starting to push us off of the Earth into space to go do things. It's a small thing, but we ought to be talking about it in those
fresh
terms,
things
right?
it's a big thing. And you know, if you could 3D print a pizza, they'd be really happy.
We're working it. We're working it.
I think you could do
We
that,
are
actually.
working.
Titanium pizzas are tough to chew on.
It's roughage.
It's tough to be. I think you really did hit the nail on the head in terms of, I mean, I get the excitement too. I want to get one mission, create a mission patch, like I say, and go. But I don't know if we have the luxury to do that right now with budgets and forecasts and where we are. But we still can get there. And I think we got to take successes in the steps along the way, whether it's growing plants, solar electric propulsion, you know, better EVA suits, Orion, SLS, better entry, descent, and landing systems. We're going to be moving the needle forward. We're going to have to paint it in the right context with as few PowerPoint charts as we can. But that's the key. Yeah, that's the key, is to keep that context.
Now, you had 3 charts, but one of those charts was like 5 charts in one, just for the record. I just want to make that clear. But you know, you get the sense that if you talk about it long enough, maybe it could become a reality. But we do have the fundamental issue of dollars and cents here. So if you take that vision, that narrative, and you jive it with what the money is right now, when do we get to Mars? You know, as somebody said last night, you know, it'll be 20 to 30 years, but we've been saying that for 20 to 30 years. So if you do the math on that, I don't think we ever get there, I'm pretty sure. So how do we reconcile that vision with the current, what Congress and what the American people have put on the table for NASA?
You know, I think, again, the way I kind of lay it out and have talked to the NAC about last week is we cannot do it at the same budget level we're at today. This is just not going to work, right? So, and the current budget has a 1% increase. It's going to need more than that. So I think there's a modest increase, but we need to, again, show the Congress and show folks, if we get this additional funding, here's the advances we can make, here's the pieces that are there, and then show how we're not just, again, doing a demonstration, but this piece actually fits into the Mars capability puzzle this way. And if we make that, maybe we can continue to break that paradigm and get some little additional funding to move forward. We also need to look very hard at what we can do internationally. Our international partners are very interested in doing this activity. Can we leverage off of their work? And likewise, the private sector. You know, there's tremendous capability there with cargo resupply and crew going to station, but can we then start extending that or expanding that into the exploration domain and do those kind of things with the industry?
Yeah, and one thing I would add to that, and Bill had it in his charts, I think the other thing that is a little different than perhaps the past is you see the mission directorates of, you know, the Corps are working together, right? We have work that's going to Mars on the science mission directorate that's feeding forward into what we're going to do for exploration. The technology that we're doing for my biggest customer and John Grunsfeld, the other biggest customer, along with the broader community, working together to get technologies feeding into those missions. You know, and on our side, I mean, and this isn't, this is kind of the down and dirty of it. We're trying to work with other partners. We're trying to work with other government agencies on the technology pieces that will feed into it. Again, it's going to be a story to tell, but we can work on the technology pieces and leverage other investments. That's the key, I think, to do it affordably.
And it's going to be hard. You know, that first chart, it all looks good when we're all working together, but to do that, you're giving up control, right? Yes. I'm going to be doing more than the science mission director would like to do on Mars. I would like to take a much larger object to the surface of Mars to go look at entry, descent, and landing. I would like to probably have more capability than a science mission needs, but if we do 2 separate missions, the cost of that is some larger number, but if we can integrate those together and be willing to give up that I don't get the perfect human mission and the science mission director doesn't get the perfect science mission, but by together we're advancing human spaceflight or humans into the solar system, that's how we win. So we've got to figure out a way we don't look at it from each one of our little stovepipes, but we look at a way holistically we can work together to go do this. The challenge is big enough It's not going to be solved by any mission director by itself. It's got to be the whole of the agency pulling together, and really the whole of the international community pulling together as well.
I would think getting to Mars would be easier than getting the NASA AAs to work together. Don't you think? Is that an accurate statement, right? Yeah.
I don't know. No, I don't know about that.
You're not going to go there, are you?
I'm not going there.
All right, we'll get a question in here. Go ahead. Say who you are, please.
Yes. Thanks. Steve Brody from ISU, International Space University. Throughout my time at NASA, and I'm sure yours as well, there's occasional wild cards that help you along and sometimes present additional challenges. One thing I'm thinking about is the infusion and or offer of significant private resources from some individuals of very deep pockets. We've had now the very real win-win with commercial cargo, and hopefully that'll continue with the commercial crew. But how do you see any other, either through conversations you've already had or sense of what's out there, any major contributory contributions from either individuals, companies, or whatever that will really get that synergistic principle and give you more than what you got now for the program ahead?
Mike, do you have any? Yeah. I would say, again, just think we need to definitely look at this. We see a lot of folks working on engine technology, which is interesting to me. There's some folks, SpaceX has just signed a Space Act agreement to look at LOX methane engine work down at Stennis. Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin has also been looking at some engine work. So whereas typically that's been the domain of the government to maybe work on some of these new engine capabilities, some of that is actually being picked up by the private sector with private sector money. So we need to watch for those pieces and move forward. We did some interesting things on Space Station with Sabatier. That's the system that takes carbon dioxide from the carbon dioxide removal system. It combines it with waste hydrogen that comes off of the electrolysis of water to generate oxygen, and it makes more water, and then it creates methane as a waste gas. Instead of buying that as a system, we didn't pay for any of the development. We just essentially agreed to pay for the water that was generated by the device. So we went to industry and said, hey, we're going to pay you $10,000 roughly per pound for water generated on station. If you don't generate any water, you don't get any pay. But if you generate water, you'll get paid at this amount for this period of time. And they were able to go do all the development up front for that system, and it's been working very well on board stations. So are there other models like that where we can leverage off of the private sector and find things that they want that actually benefit us? So we've got to continue to look at that and just don't assume that it has to be always the government doing these activities.
And the other thing I would add from a technology standpoint, a similar story. When we see interest in high-power solar electric propulsion, not only for a cargo tug, for future exploration, for moving the asteroid, but we see interest in the commercial spacecraft industry. Can we leverage that interest? Interest is good, but can we leverage that interest? We think we can. In optical communications, laser comm from geosynchronous orbit, that has incredible benefits not only for the next generation TDRS, but also for other government agencies that we won't speak about here, but it also has interest in the cable operators and their cable satellites, and can get content up to those satellites. Can we leverage that interest? We think we can.
Well, so what's the right mix on that? I mean, can we get to Mars leveraging private sector ingenuity? There are certain things that there'll never be a business case for, right? And to what extent do you have to go to business and say, hey, we have a need, and to what extent are they coming to you?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes on some things. Some things like optical comm, green propellant and the replacement of hydrazine that we're doing with Ball and Aerojet, solar electric propulsion, yes, there's some commonality. Now, other areas, maybe not. Entry, descent, and landing is one, perhaps, is a little unique, to the agency and landing on Mars.
It's hard to sell that to an automaker or something, right?
And I would say even in low Earth orbit, I don't envision another government space station beyond the space station we have today. I see the private sector picking up the next generation of space station in low Earth orbit, and they will do that to generate commercial products that they learned and it got to experiment with on board space station. So I see our space station today as a chance for them to to experiment with what might be helpful in the pharmaceutical world, in the drug world, in the biological world, and materials world, that they can see, hey, there's something here that the microgravity environment gives me a different insight into a physical process. I would like to have a research facility in space to do that. We've enabled transportation through both cargo and crew so that it's not cost prohibitive for them to get there. They can then work with some companies that are talking about building some laboratories in space, and maybe a single purpose laboratory now is a research environment. Then that's creating essentially now a private sector infrastructure we can use, and we don't have to replicate any of that in any of our future plans. So I'm hoping that we use station to be that next piece. And this extension of station out to 2024 actually gives us a fighting chance to expose a broader community beyond aerospace to the advantages of doing research in space.
Having another 10 years of station, that was a significant
it was
thing.
huge.
It was a huge thing, I think. And is it enough time for you? I mean, you're talking a pretty long time frame for what you want to accomplish here. If you know, 10 years from now you don't have a station, will you be wishing you had it there, or you use what you can?
I'll use what I can. I think the big thing is it really changed the environment for the commercial sector. When they thought station was going to end in 2020, I couldn't get any commercial company to think at all about doing space-based research. The focus was too short. The stability wasn't there. Yeah. But just that change of 4 more years from 2020 to 2024 has really changed the commercial sector's perception of what space is and how they can use space. And the fact that we're doing the cargo flights we are privately, they can go directly and get private services now to take cargo up. Eventually we'll have crew. So they're actually starting to say, hey, this isn't such a foreign environment to us. We're willing to go invest. And I think when that, going back to the question that was asked here, when that tipping point kind of changes, where now private sector doesn't see this as something that's so risky that only governments can do, and they see a way they can actually start turning profit in low Earth orbit or using resources in space, then I think you start seeing a much broader base to build the kind of things we need to go forward.
It was hard to regain the confidence of the commercial sector and the academic world, too, after all that happened at the end of the space station program, when the science budgets were cut so dramatically.
Yep. And we're slowly, I think, getting that back again. But again, it's, you know, they're skeptical, right? And it's this stability thing. So as you talked about before, being sustainable, right? And building plans and processes that can take the storms that come when we have a sequester that comes and the whole program doesn't fall apart, or we get an administration change and we don't get a re-vector to start all over again. If we've got a plan that is making measured, sustainable progress, I think then that's how we ultimately get to Mars.
All right, we have a question over here.
Thank you. I'm Chris Lanehart from George Washington University. My question has to do with the slide that's been shown twice now regarding the proving ground missions. And those are beyond low Earth orbit, and it said 1 to 12 months. And I'm interested primarily from the biomedical challenges side of things. But is there currently a plan in place for a proving ground mission of 6 to 12 months? And if so, what does that plan entail?
What we're thinking about, again, in the cislunar space in the vicinity around the moon, we're looking at potentially a crew-tended capability there, a habitation module. Again, I don't see that as a moon habitation module per se that is crew-tended, but that would be the habitation module we'd potentially use on a Mars-class mission. So the idea is to take this life support system that we worked on space station, it's a Mars-class station, put it into a crew-tended space station and stick it around the moon. That enables a lot of lunar activity, and there's a lot of interest in the international community about doing lunar surface activities. It's a base to operate and do those activities. You can get nice view times of the South Pole and North Pole of the moon. You can do a lot of telerobotic things. We've even done that from station. We've driven rovers from space stations out in California to go look at how we would deploy antennas on the far side of the moon. You can do that from this crew-tended facility in deep space. I think the other thing that, if you think about it, is we talked about maybe pre-positioning hardware around Mars. So you'll launch a component with a life support system. It spends a year journey to get out there. Now it's in the Martian environment, and it doesn't get activated now for another year. And then it has to come up and operate immediately. Sometimes our systems are not so good just sitting around. This proving ground lets us go ahead and put a laboratory around the moon, and where we visit it maybe every couple months, it actually looks at how we shut that system down and how we reactivate it. So it's actually, again, being judged by how it helps us get ready for Mars.
If you had your druthers, again, in a perfect world with unlimited money, would it help you to land on the moon? Or would it be a detour that just would kind of suck resources, time, whatever?
Well, The challenge there, of course, is that it doesn't have much of an atmosphere, so that entry, descent, and landing piece certainly doesn't play out. The lunar lander would be chemical. So I'm not sure, from that aspect anyway.
As the President said, been there, done that? I mean, is that the way you look at it?
Yep, and I would say not quite so much, but in Charlie's talk, somebody asked him about partial gravity, and that's the advantage you get of the moon. By being on the surface of the moon, you get to see the human body now in a partial gravity environment. You know, we live here in 1G, station is 0G.
But can you interpolate to Mars? Does that make sense or not?
I think you can interpolate to Mars. They would like to get some data there. We have some, we canceled the large centrifuge for space station, but we have some small centrifuges on station where we can look at things kind of at the cellular level, at the small plant level. And I think that will give us some indication of, is there a problem in this intermediate gravity level? But and I don't think it's worth the expense right now of going to the moon to get that partial gravity condition. I believe we can get that with station unless this research on station points to us seeing some huge problem where partial gravity is a consideration that we would have to deal with.
And the other thing I'd offer there, I mean, there are certainly, you could imagine, capabilities and learning to live on the surface and telerobotics, but there's also, again, private partnerships and private organizations that are also interested in the moon. So there are some ways perhaps we can partner in a very smart way to go do that.
And I think that another piece is being in this proving ground region. If our international partners really want to go to the surface of the moon, great, let them go do that. Or if commercial industry sees the advantage of using some lunar materials for certain activities, that's fine, we'll go support that, but then our focus is really going beyond. So again, we don't have to do everything for ourselves, but we should be aware of the environment we're in and then leverage off of the other activities that are being done that help us get the goal of where we're heading towards Mars.
Should we figure out a way to partner with the Chinese?
I think the Chinese will be a key player somewhere in this situation, so I can't imagine at some point we don't work with the Chinese.
Should we partner with the Chinese?
I can't answer that. So.
How about you?
And still continue to sit on this stage, right? I'll be teleported to Mars momentarily if I offer any real answers.
Glenn, question.
My name is Greg Cecil, and I am a former space shuttle worker, and I'm now a middle school science teacher down in Florida. And my question is that Constellation was set up by the Bush administration to take us to the moon and Mars and beyond. Unfortunately, when the new administration came in, that was canceled. My greatest fear is that now that you have an idea of what you want to do and you have a roadmap set up with SLS, if we have a new administration come into power in 2016, 2017, will we have everything scratched again and starting from base zero? Has NASA considered that and worried about that?
Yeah, I would say yes. I mean, we're really working as fast as we can on both Orion and SLS. You'll get to see an Orion test flight at the end of this year in December. That's going to look at the heat shield performance. That's essentially 80% of the software will fly on exploration class missions around the moon, so that's a big plus. The actual first dome for the exploration mission 1 in 2017 is actually manufactured down in New Orleans. We're putting in a large machine that will actually start building the tanks down there. We're working on the exploration upper stage for Mars class missions. So I think by the time we get into 2016, I'm going to have significant hardware. In fact, I do today that you can go out and touch and see. And it's not mission destination specific. What we're doing by going to cislunar space, if somebody decides we want to revector and do some lunar activities, we can go do lunar activities, but it's also focused towards Mars. So we're trying to stay kind of destination independent, but more capability driven, and try to make that point to the next group that comes in with an idea. Okay, we understand what you'd like to go do, how you put your fingerprint on this vision. We create enough flexibility in the vision that we can change the vision a little bit, but we don't lose the ultimate goal of where we're going. Because the sustainability is absolutely critical.
How much metal do you have to bend? How many congressionally linked jobs do you have to have before you have enough inertia for a program that it sustains itself? What does it take?
If I could answer that, I'd have a PhD.
There's your thesis.
There's my thesis.
Yeah, I have one. I can't answer that either.
What shouldn't? Why can't we do space?
We also do ourselves a big disservice, right? Because we kind of argue with ourselves about the perfect plan, right? And at some point, that's not helpful.
The enemy
to
of
us.
the good, right?
I know.
Yeah.
The problem is that the outside world sees these supposed smart people all arguing, so there must be something that isn't right.
Right.
And so then they kind of go, well, we don't really want to go do that. So we need to make sure that we don't get so caught up in trying to find the absolute perfect plan that meets everything that doesn't sustain itself. So can we all as a community get together and recognize that, hey, sustainability is important?
Right. Question over here.
Hi, Harry Finger. Going back to the origin of NASA and its predecessor, in fact, and also as head of the Joint Office of NASA and the Atomic Energy Commission, where we developed the nuclear thermal rocket propulsion. And in 1970, we were ready to really move forward talking about human Mars missions. I heard no word of the thermal propulsion at all here, and I haven't heard of it in anything. We really had it. President Nixon at that time killed that program and several others in the space program. We haven't given rebirth to that. But we really were ready to move forward with a Mars mission at that time. We're talking now, over 40 years later. What consideration has been given to nuclear thermal rocket propulsion that we already had developed then and could move on at high thrust? You mentioned nuclear electric, which is certainly very good, but it's a low thrust system that takes longer for mission.
Yeah, well, I think we're still living on the shoulders of giants, and you're one of those giants. Because many of the technologies and capabilities we have were either proven out, including some of the work. Every time we come up with a new system, entry, descent, and landing, I always now ask, okay, it was done in the 60s, right? Oh, yeah, here's the test data from the 60s, right? Every single time.
It's all been done.
It's all been done. It's all been done. It's all been done. So nuclear thermal, I agree with, it was really pushed forward in a significant way in the 70s. I think most of the trade studies that we see to go to Mars, including the ones that we have in space tech, say that nuclear thermal is probably the best means we have to get there as quick as we can. And as quick as we can, helps with the crew, helps with radiation. So it is a question of investment priority, and when do you invest, and how much do you invest, and when do you do it? We have modest investments right now in nuclear thermal. I think actually they're in Bill's org, if I remember. We kind of tried to make sure we're not overlapping, right? So there's modest investments there to keep the system alive. And when we can get the right budget and the right time, many would argue that's the way to go.
I think it was unfortunate calling it the Fukushima engine, though. Wasn't that a bad idea?
See, frankly, I just don't see we're going to get there even in 30 years with it's going. When you say 30 years, I think, gee, we were doing it in 1970.
There are some trades that would argue that in cryogenic propulsion that you can, if under certain conditions the planet's on the right alignment, so it's a very narrow case, you can do it. But to get there regularly and repeatably in a fashion, we got to get back to that.
All right, so we're a little short on time. We're kind of getting down to the 5-minute realm. So if I could ask you to get right to your question so we can get a few more in, I'd appreciate it. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Rick Tomlinson. You guys are coming a long way, and some of the answers I've seen with Bill and you have been very good. They're kind of music to my ears as far as working with the private sector. But there's still this learning that needs to occur, maybe even not so much at NASA, but over on the Hill, and the staffers and the people there, as to the fact that the private sector, not just commercial, but the private sector, is going to maybe be starting slow, but they're going to be going faster and faster and faster. There are going to be times where they get ahead of you. You could see some of these billionaires pulled together and actually do a Mars mission that might start to go faster. Wouldn't it be a good idea to have sort of an annual, at least, review wherein NASA and the leaders in the private sectors sit down and talk about and maybe coordinate these things, because it's going to happen. It's going to get faster and faster and faster. You might land there second.
That sounds like a reasonable thing we should think about.
I think of something wrong with that.
But because I think, again, kind of back to the other discussion, is we've got to make sure we're not just talking to ourselves all the time, right? And I think to your point, Rick, we need to go look and say, okay, maybe we need to talk about these things to a broader community, expose them to what we can do, and then also have them tell us what they can do. Because the private sector can clearly take more risk. They have significant investment funds. What are they interested in? Where would they like to go? And I think it might be helpful to have a broader kind of forum, or expand this Human to Mars workshop to include maybe a broader community.
Yeah, I mean, if you get there second, you still need to make it look like a victory, right? So, there you go.
All right, we'll do this quickly. Quick question, please.
Yes, excellent point from the gentleman who brought up the alternative of nuclear thermal propulsion. I have kind of a related question, and that is, why is there so much of a focus on solar electric propulsion?
The focus on solar electric is a couple-fold, right? One, for the asteroid retrieval mission, this next mission into the proving ground, right, where we can go operate in deep space, it has the capability, and it's the most efficient form of transportation really out there in space. You know, we think about transportation on Earth, we have tugs, we have barges, we have fast vehicles and slow. SEP is extremely efficient. We think it's ready for the next step. We can leverage the interest in industry. It's good for multiple purposes. It's the next one that we can just push over the needle. And it's not only us. Look at the National Research Council came out with the Space Tech Roadmap. High priority. Go do high power SEP. If you look at most of the trade studies, it enables exploration.
I think a big piece is really what Mike was pulling on is it has more application than just to NASA and to just our mission. To get high-power solar arrays is important to the communication satellite industry. They would very much like to have those, so they're going to be pushing this technology, so it's us and them pushing, so it's not just NASA pushing this for our own needs. And the other piece is the electric propulsion piece, the higher-powered thrusters to replace liquid apogee motors on communication satellites. Commercial industry is interested in that piece. So this is a way we can leverage off of what commercial is already doing and moving forward. In the nuclear thermal propulsion area, it's pretty much us alone pushing. There isn't quite yet another private sector application for that class of rocket. But we need to keep investing in the technology and take the work that was done back in the 60s and take it to that next step, because we know a lot more about control systems now. Computers are much more sophisticated in terms of automatic control systems. We can take some of that and move it forward at the right pace and then expose that. But I think our focus really is along the lines of sustainability. This is something that isn't uniquely needed for us. It can be shared with a broader group.
And I think that's a key aspect of where we are today. This is, again, not trying to do it all ourselves and trying to be smart about it. And you know, one of the challenges for nuclear thermal is the ability to store liquid hydrogen, right? That's one of the keys to it. We're working that now. We're working that it's not only good for cryogenic propellant storage and transfer, but it's also good for nuclear thermal. So again, we're trying to take the common pieces and threads and do it right now today.
Buzz.
I have several questions, but we have a break coming up, and people can be thinking about them. In relation to doing things in the past and then kind of putting them on the shelf, it reminds me of the HL-20, derived from the Bohr 4, photographed, and a lot of wind tunnel tests, and it was part of a program, and it was put on the shelf, and Jim Benson bought it, and now Mark Sorangelo is doing it again. I'm just wondering if inflatables as a trans-hab was a program at one time, and now it's back in another program developed by Las Vegas, Bigelow. Just several days ago, we had a giant thinker leave us, John Houbolt, and he was a great role model for me, and I hope that some of the thoughts that I come up with can in some way mimic what he's been able to do. At the moon, we had a free return trajectory, and we modified that once the SPS was working. We were always in a relatively close lunar Earth orbit, and Apollo 13 indicated that we could probably come back. I don't believe we have that capability in the trans-Mars injection with a flyby free return that is an acceptable solution, nor do we have a rescue ability. Why don't we do like many other industries do? Instead of one big large thing that could fail, why don't we have two small things? Like fighter airplanes, they fly in formation. If one can't do the job, the other one can. Sure, you could do them, but leave a staging orbit at 5-mile formation difference, or 10-mile. And now wait a minute, don't be so stupid. Why don't you put them together in the staging orbit and have them fly out? Now you can jettison the one that fails and continue to do the job if you have two crew modules. On the subject of crew modules, can Orion aerobrake into Mars orbit? Does it have the capability of doing that? When I look at what I need at Mars, I need landers. And landers are capable of aerobraking and transporting people from one position to another, to bringing back people. I don't know who's here from Lockheed, but I got to ask the question, why do we need Orion in Mars orbit? I really don't believe that that's the case. I may have had another question. Well, I guess we did have the idea of wanting to have a launch vehicle and then a larger habitat. Once we have the larger habitat, we can put the people in the launch vehicle. Why can't we put them into the large vehicle in a landing vehicle just as well as an Orion? Let me leave it at that.
Well, I suppose yes or no is not an option, so.
We can try. I would say, first of all, on expandable, we're going to look at that on Space Station with Beam in 2015. We're going to actually go look at expandable technology to see what advantages that gives to us. So we'll get a chance to see. It's reported to have better thermal conditions. It's also the larger volume allows you to put water in for shielding for radiation, which would be a good thing. So we'll actually get some real world experience with expandables on board station. To Buzz's point, we're looking at, we call it now evolvable and a modular architecture for Mars. So it's along the lines of what Buzz is talking about, maybe multiple habitation modules. We may pre-position a habitation module around Mars someplace ahead of time. Then we do the rendezvous with that habitation module, and that's your return vehicle. You may actually pre-position your return vehicle at Mars and then come back. So instead of looking at a single monolithic kind of mission, we're looking at we call it evolvable, where we build pieces, we position pieces up front, and then we also call it modular because we're trying to use similar components throughout the architecture. So we're starting to look at those things. Phobos and Deimos are also very interesting pieces for us. Can we take advantage of these natural satellites around Mars and use those in a Mars architecture and use a piece of those for what we're trying to go do? We're looking a lot at high elliptical Earth orbit transfer, so we're not in the gravity well. We're looking at some of the cycler stuff that Buzz has been doing. So we're starting to take a different approach towards Mars than we have before. Our classic missions were more Apollo style in a way, where we launched everything in a campaign within a year, and we sent the armada of spacecraft that you saw in the view graphs towards Mars. I think we're going to do that maybe over a period of time, over a period of years, and build more of an evolvable piece. So we need all of us to start thinking maybe in a different way. So it's not a single mission, but it really is this pioneering aspect, or how do we move human presence in? And then once that mental change starts making, and you're looking at it for the long term, then you invest in some things that might take actually longer to go do, but they may be more sustainable. So we're looking at many of these things that Buzz talked about.
Last word, Mike.
I think, well said. And if you look at where we're getting to Mars, we're going to get there in a sustainable, affordable way. And we know the technology is important, and that's why we have the investments we have underway. And again, you'll see us continue to make those investments over these next 18 months in a number of key areas.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Great talk. Enjoy speaking with you. Thanks for your attention. Chris.
Thank you, gentlemen, for a fascinating discussion. Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break, but before we do, I just want to share a little bit of information. Something I didn't mention in the opening remarks. We have over 1,200 schools watching the webcast today, so I think it's over that now. And I think we have an image of one of the schools. International Space University is actually watching right now. Here's a picture of them watching the webcast. So we have people all over the world, thousands of students around the world watching the webcast.